Jonathan Hale had built his fortune on foresight, control, and preparation. Those same instincts had driven him to install discreet security cameras throughout his sprawling home, not out of paranoia for his wealth, but out of fear for his son. 12-year-old Lucas had been paralyzed from the waist down after a reckless driver ran a red light 3 years earlier, shattering not only Lucas's spine, but the fragile world Jonathan had believed he could protect with money alone. Since that day, the mansion had filled with doctors, therapists, nurses, and maids who came and went like seasonal staff. Some were kind, some careless, and some were merely there for the paycheck. Jonathan had learned the hard way that not everyone treated a vulnerable child with the dignity he deserved. He had caught a raised voice by accident, a rough tug on a wheelchair, and a therapist who skipped exercises when she thought no one was watching. Each incident chipped away at Jonathan's trust. So he hid cameras, tiny and silent, embedded in corners, lamps, and shelves, telling himself it was only to keep Lucas safe. Yet even as the feeds streamed to his private office, Jonathan rarely watched them anymore. Seeing his son's daily struggle through a lens felt like reopening a wound. When the previous maid quit abruptly, citing emotional exhaustion, Jonathan hired a new one without much thought. Her name was Elena. She was quiet during the interview, her resume plain, her references brief but sincere. She didn't flatter him or stare at the marble floors in awe. She asked only one question: does Lucas like music? Jonathan barely noticed it at the time. The first week passed uneventfully. Elena kept the house spotless, prepared simple meals, and followed Lucas's schedule precisely. Jonathan, buried in meetings and late-night calls, barely crossed paths with her. Lucas, however, seemed different. The boy who once answered questions with shrugs or monosyllables started lingering in the kitchen when Elena hummed softly while cooking. His eyes followed her movements with a curiosity Jonathan hadn't seen in years. One evening, Jonathan returned home early, exhausted and restless, and decided, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, to open the camera feeds. He expected nothing. Perhaps that was why what he saw unsettled him so deeply. On the screen, Elena sat on the floor beside Lucas's wheelchair, not speaking, not doing therapy, not even touching him. She was simply there, matching her breathing to his, eyes closed, palms resting on the cool tile. After a long moment, she whispered something Jonathan couldn't hear clearly. Lucas's shoulders, usually tense, slowly dropped. Jonathan leaned closer to the screen. Elena began tapping softly on the floor, a rhythm so gentle it barely registered, then handed Lucas 2 wooden spoons. Jonathan's heart hammered. Was she mocking him? Was she playing games instead of working? He was about to storm into the room when Lucas did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He smiled. It wasn't a wide, cinematic grin, but a small, genuine spark of life that reached his eyes. Jonathan froze, his hand on the door handle of his office. He sat back down, mesmerized. For the next hour, he watched as Elena turned the sterile living room into a sanctuary of sound. She didn't treat Lucas like a patient, she treated him like a percussionist. She used the floor, the legs of the table, and the wooden spoons to create a complex, rhythmic dialogue. When Lucas grew frustrated because his hands shook, Elena didn't offer pity. She simply stopped, waited for the silence to settle, and started a new, slower beat. She was teaching him that even if his legs were silent, his spirit could still make a sound. Jonathan realized then that he had provided his son with the best medical care money could buy, but he had forgotten to provide him with a reason to want to get better. As the days turned into weeks, Jonathan became an invisible witness to a transformation. Through the cameras, he saw Elena bringing in old records and teaching Lucas how to feel the vibration of the bass through his fingertips. He saw her gently encouraging him to try the grueling physical therapy exercises not as a chore, but as tuning the instrument. The most profound moment came when Jonathan watched Elena sit Lucas in front of a grand piano he hadn't touched since the accident. Lucas stared at the keys with a mixture of longing and terror. Elena didn't push him. She simply sat on the bench next to him and played a single middle C. Then she waited. It took 20 minutes of silence before Lucas reached out a trembling hand and pressed the key next to it. Jonathan, watching from his office, felt tears streaming down his face. He was a billionaire, a man who could buy companies and influence markets, yet he was learning the meaning of patience from a woman who owned nothing but a few old records and a kind heart. However, the peace was shattered when Jonathan's business partner, a cold and calculated man named Marcus, visited the house. Marcus saw Elena laughing with Lucas in the garden and pulled Jonathan aside. He warned Jonathan that Elena was overstepping, that she was distracting the boy from his clinical recovery, and that a maid should know her place. Marcus's words planted a seed of doubt, fueled by Jonathan's old habit of needing to be in control. That night, Jonathan watched the cameras with a critical eye, looking for a reason to find fault. He saw Elena helping Lucas into his bed, but instead of leaving, she stayed to read him a story, not a children's book, but a biography of a famous composer who had overcome deafness. Jonathan felt a pang of jealousy. Why was his son opening up to a stranger and not to him? The tension peaked when Jonathan discovered Elena had taken Lucas out of the house without explicit permission. He checked the GPS on the van and saw they were at a local community center. Furious and panicked, Jonathan drove there, ready to fire her on the spot. He burst into the hall, his face a mask of rage, but stopped dead in his tracks. In the center of a small circle of children with various disabilities sat Lucas. He wasn't in the back, he was at the front, holding a small drum. Elena was standing behind him, her hands lightly on his shoulders, giving him the confidence to lead the group in a rhythm. For the first time, Jonathan didn't see a paralyzed boy. He saw a leader. He saw a child who was part of the world again. Elena caught Jonathan's eye from across the room. She didn't look afraid, she looked hopeful. That evening, back at the mansion, Jonathan called Elena into his office. He had the camera feeds open on his desk. Elena looked at the monitors and then back at Jonathan, realizing for the first time that she had been watched. The air was thick with a silence that felt heavier than the house itself. "I saw what you did," Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion. Elena braced herself for the dismissal, her chin held high. "You gave him back his soul," Jonathan whispered. He turned the monitors off, one by one. Jonathan didn't fire Elena. Instead, he asked her to help him learn. He realized that his wealth had built a fortress around Lucas, but Elena had built a bridge. He began spending his evenings not in his office watching cameras, but on the floor with his son, learning the rhythms that Elena had taught. The cameras remained, but they were no longer tools of suspicion, they were archived memories of a turning point. Jonathan eventually established a foundation for music therapy for children with spinal injuries, with Elena as the head of the program. The story of the billionaire and the maid became a legend in their city, but not because of the money or the cameras. It was an authentic testament to the idea that the greatest healing doesn't come from a pill or a procedure, but from being truly seen and heard. Lucas never regained the use of his legs, but he regained his life. He grew up to be a composer, his music filled with the thump-thump of wooden spoons on a kitchen floor. Jonathan learned that true protection isn't about preventing pain, but about being present through it. In the end, the cameras didn't catch a crime, they caught the quiet, persistent miracle of human connection, proving that while money can build a house, only love can make it a home.